You think self-improvement is about becoming a different person. It's actually about becoming a more efficient version of the person who already exists. And that distinction is the reason almost everything you've been told about it is slightly wrong. By the end of this video, you'll understand not just what self-improvement actually is, why the new year, new me version of it fails almost everyone who tries it, who first started studying it scientifically, and the one mechanism that separates people who change permanently from people who bounce back to who they were within a few months. Stick around, because the last part of this video covers a finding that even most self-help authors get backwards. Here's the phrase to hold on to for the next 20 minutes. You don't decide who you become, you repeat who you become. Everything in this video is really just an explanation of that one sentence. The definition nobody agrees on. Ask 10 people what self-improvement means, and you'll get 10 different answers. Reading more books, waking up at 5 a.m., meditating, making more money, losing weight, journaling. The word has become a container for basically any behavior a person feels virtuous about. But strip away the specific activities, and there's a single mechanism underneath all of them. Self-improvement is the deliberate, repeated adjustment of a behavior in response to feedback, aimed at a future version of yourself that doesn't exist yet. That's it. Everything else, the productivity apps, the cold plunges, the habit trackers, is just packaging around that one process. This is why just try harder fails as advice. Trying harder is a single event. Improvement is a loop. Act, get feedback, adjust, act again. A person who works out once and quits hasn't failed at self-improvement. They've just demonstrated that they didn't build the loop. Misconception. Number 1. Most people assume self-improvement is fundamentally about willpower, that some people simply have more of an internal resource for self-discipline, and others don't. This turns out to be almost backwards. Roy Baumeister's research on what he called ego depletion in the 1990s suggested willpower behaves like a muscle that fatigues with use. But even setting that debate aside, the more consistent finding across behavioral research is that people who seem to have superhuman discipline usually don't rely on willpower at all. They rely on environment design. They've removed the decision point entirely. The person who never eats junk food at 9 p.m. isn't resisting a craving through sheer force each night. They simply don't have junk food in the house. Think about what that means for how you've been approaching change. If you've ever white-knuckled your way through a new habit and burned out by week 3, that's not a personal failing. That's what happens when you try to run a system on willpower instead of design, where this was first studied. Self-improvement as a lived practice is ancient. You can trace it back through Stoic philosophy, where writers like Epictetus taught that people should focus their effort only on what's within their control and let go of the rest. But self-improvement as a studied, measurable process is much younger, and it starts somewhere most people wouldn't expect: a pigeon cage in the 1930s. B.F. Skinner wasn't trying to write a self-help book. He was a behavioral psychologist studying how pigeons and rats learned to repeat actions that were followed by a reward, a process he called operant conditioning. Skinner's core finding was unglamorous but foundational. Behavior that gets reinforced gets repeated, and behavior that doesn't fades out. Humans, it turns out, run on the same basic circuitry. Every modern habit tracking app, every streak counter, every gold star sticker chart a parent has ever used, all of it is Skinner's box, just rebranded. The leap from behavior can be shaped by reinforcement to you can deliberately shape your own behavior took decades to formalize. Psychologist Albert Bandura's work in the 1970s on self-efficacy, essentially how much a person believes they're capable of succeeding at a specific task, added the missing piece. Belief about your own capability directly changes whether you attempt the behavior at all, independent of your actual skill level. Skinner explained how behavior gets locked in. Bandura explained why some people never even try. The habit myth. Everyone repeats. Misconception number 2. Somewhere along the way, The number 21 attached itself to habit formation like a barnacle. It takes 21 days to build a habit, gets repeated constantly, and it's almost entirely a myth. Trace back to a 1960s plastic surgeon named Maxwell Maltz, who noticed his patients took about 3 weeks to adjust to a new face or amputated limb, and generalized that observation into a rule of thumb that had nothing to do with behavioral. The actual number comes from a 2009 study out of University College London, led by health psychologist Philippa Lally, who tracked 96 people trying to build a new habit. Things like drinking a glass of water after breakfast or running for 15 minutes before dinner. She measured how long it took for the behavior to become automatic. The average was 66 days, but that average hides a much more useful detail. The range spanned from 18 days all the way to 254 days, depending on the complexity of the habit and the person. Here's why that range matters more than the average. If you go in expecting a 21-day finish line and you're still consciously forcing yourself on day 40, it feels like proof the process is broken, even though day 40 is completely normal for a moderately difficult habit. The people who succeed long-term aren't the ones who happen to have easy habits. They're the ones who never set a deadline for automaticity in the first place, so there's no finish line to miss. You don't decide who you become, you repeat who you become. And repetition, per Lally's data, is measured in months, not weeks. Motivation has the order backwards. Misconception. Number 3. This might be the most common trap of all, waiting to feel motivated before you act. It seems logical. Motivation, then action, then result. But behavioral scientists who study this, including researcher B.J. Fogg at Stanford, have found the sequence usually runs the opposite direction. Action tends to generate motivation, not the other way around. Fogg's Tiny Habits research showed that starting with a version of the behavior so small, it requires almost no motivation at all. 2 push-ups instead of a 20-minute workout, 1 sentence in a journal instead of a full page, reliably gets people moving, and the motivation shows up after they're already in motion, as a kind of momentum effect. Think about the last time you didn't want to go to the gym, went anyway out of pure obligation, and ended up having a genuinely good session. That's not a coincidence. That's the actual mechanism, working exactly as designed. Waiting for motivation to strike before acting is like waiting for a car engine to warm up before you turn the key. Quick pause here, because this is a good spot for it. If this video is filling in gaps you didn't know you had about how change actually works, a like genuinely helps more people find it. YouTube tends to show videos to more people once they see others are engaging. Alright, back to it, because the next misconception is the one that trips up even people who think they've got self-improvement figured out. The comfort zone isn't the enemy. Misconception. Number 4. Get out of your comfort zone gets treated as the master key to growth, as if comfort itself is the obstacle. But the research on stress and performance tells a more specific story. Psychologists Robert Yerkes and John Dodson identified back in 1908 that performance increases with stress and difficulty only up to a certain point. After that point, additional stress actively degrades performance, producing what's now called the Yerkes-Dodson law, often visualized as an upside-down U. This means the goal was never to leave your comfort zone entirely and live in constant discomfort. The goal is to operate in what researchers sometimes call the stretch zone, just outside comfort, but nowhere near panic. A weightlifter doesn't build strength by lifting the heaviest possible weight every single session. Sustained overload without recovery leads to injury, not growth. The muscle gets stronger by lifting slightly more than it's used to, recovering and repeating, the exact same loop from part 1. Skill development, confidence, and identity change all follow that same curve, not a straight line upward through pure suffering. This is also why identity matters more than most people give it credit for. Psychologist Carol Dweck's research on what she termed a growth mindset, the belief that abilities can be developed through effort, versus a fixed mindset that treats ability as static, found that people who see a skill as developable respond to failure completely differently than people who see it as a fixed trait being tested. A fixed mindset person who fails a task concludes something about who they are. A growth mindset person concludes something about what they haven't done yet. Same failure. Two completely different loops afterward. One that repeats the attempt, one that avoids it. You don't decide who you become, you repeat who you become. And whether you repeat the attempt after failing depends almost entirely on which of those two stories you told. What actually separates permanent change from rebound? This is the part most self-help content skips because it's less inspiring than a montage. Psychologist Anders Ericsson, whose research on expertise became famous and frequently oversimplified as the 10,000-hour rule, was actually making a much narrower point than the one that got popularized. Ericsson's studies of violinists, chess players, and athletes found that raw hours logged mattered far less than what he called deliberate practice. Practice with a specific target just past your current ability, immediate feedback on whether you hit it, and full concentration rather than autopilot repetition. That distinction, feedback-driven repetition versus mindless repetition, is the real dividing line between people whose changes stick and people who rebound. Someone who goes running every day without ever checking pace, form, or how their body responds isn't in a feedback loop. They're in a routine. Routines are comfortable, but they plateau. A feedback loop, by contrast, keeps adjusting, which is slower and less comfortable in the short term, but it's the only version of repetition that compounds instead of just repeating flat. This also explains rebound, the thing that happens to almost everyone who's ever tried a big lifestyle overhaul and watched it dissolve by spring. Rebound isn't a failure of motivation. It's what happens when a change was built entirely on willpower and novelty, both of which fade, instead of on a feedback loop embedded into an environment. The moment novelty wears off, if there's no system underneath it, there's nothing left holding the behavior up. Putting the loop together. So here's the actual mechanism, assembled from everything above. Self-improvement isn't one skill. It's 4 components running as a loop. A trigger small enough that it doesn't require motivation to start. Fogg's contribution. An environment engineered so the desired behavior is the path of least resistance. The willpower myth, corrected. A stretch just past current ability, not a leap into panic. Yerkes and Dodson's curve. And feedback specific enough to adjust the next repetition. Ericsson's deliberate practice, running underneath everything. Remove any one of those 4, and the loop stalls. Too big a trigger, and you never start. No environment design, and willpower eventually loses. Too big a stretch, and stress overwhelms the gain. No feedback, and repetition flatlines into a routine instead of compounding into growth. None of this requires talent. None of it requires a personality transplant. It requires understanding that the version of you 6 months from now isn't built in a single decision. It's built in several hundred nearly identical, unremarkable repetitions that each individually look like nothing. So, back to that shrimp punch fast fact you might have expected and didn't get. Self-improvement isn't a mountain you climb through raw willpower, the way it's usually pitched. It's closer to what B.F. Skinner found in that pigeon cage almost a century ago. A loop of small action, feedback, and reinforcement, repeated so many times it eventually stops feeling like effort at all. You don't decide who you become, you repeat who you become. That's not a motivational line. By this point in the video, you've seen the actual research behind why it's literally, mechanically true. If this reframes something you thought you already understood, a like tells YouTube to put it in front of more people who'd get something out of it too. And if you've got a habit you've been trying and failing to stick with, drop it in the comments, genuinely curious what part of the loop is missing for people. Subscribe if you want more of these. New What Is videos go up regularly, and there's a whole backlog if this one landed for you. One more thing before you go, because it didn't fit anywhere else, and it's too good to cut. Ericsson's deliberate practice research produced a strange side finding. Expert performers, across wildly different fields, chess, music, surgery, plateau at almost identical points in their training if their practice stays passive, and then break through at almost identical points once feedback becomes specific again. Different skills entirely, same curve, which suggests the loop this whole video just walked through isn't specific to habits, or fitness, or productivity at all. It might just be how skill acquisition works in the human brain, full stop, regardless of what you're trying to get better at.